This is some theory that a broker has come up with in terms of trying to convince people to get transactions done.
It seems like everybody I know who's renting a home now is being served that eviction notice.
The landlord actually needs to provide the certification from the municipality.
Prices are going crazy.
But I mean, that's exactly what the law implies. You had to walk around with the checkbook in your pocket.
The landlord agreed on 4 checks. At renewal, the landlord came and says, guess what? Now I want 1 check. Hello and welcome to Home Finders, a podcast by Property Finder. I'm your host, Mohammed Kaswani, and we're incredibly excited to be kicking back this new season with a very, very important subject. Today, we're here to talk to you about rentals with Morgan. Now, Morgan, you know, usually whenever I have questions about renting, you're the one I usually bother, and I'm really, really excited to have you here. You've been in property management pretty much all of your life, or most of your career, now leading property management at Asteco. And I know Asteco is one of the largest property management operators in the UAE, 20,000 units, minus plus. You've been doing it 15 years. You've worn the hat of a landlord and the tenant at the same time. So we're very, very happy to have you here and looking forward to a conversation. Renting has been very much on people's mind. So let's dive straight into it.
Sure.
First-time renters, right? So, you know, somebody moved here from Europe, you know, been around, checked out the sites, loved the Michelin star restaurants, and then we're looking for a house to rent. I get a lot of these questions. I'm sure you do as well. What are your thoughts? What are you usually telling people to do?
Thanks for inviting me to the conversation, Mohammed. Key things really for renters is looking at where they want to be. You know, do we want to live on the Palm Jumeirah? Do we want to be by a beach? Are we after parks? I think it's understanding your needs from a location and family requirements. And this really helps to, I suppose, narrow down when you start your search using Property Finder to look for a home in terms of the locations. And those locations are generally serviced by lots of specialist agents. And you know, they'll sell you whatever they can in terms of what their speciality is. But I think it's really important to really look for the variety and in terms of price and the options that are available to you.
But then I feel like some of the challenges people are having is they're in for a surprise because, you know, again, particularly expats who are in Dubai for the first time, they realize that they can't search before they have their visa residency and their ID. And then, you know, they're going around and they're thinking, what, 1 check? And we're going to talk about the 1 check phenomena later. Do you get, at least at Asteco, in terms of qualifying new residents who have just moved to the UAE, is it usually a challenge, or do you think landlords are more accommodating now than?
Things have changed a lot. I've been here 15 years and in the industry and here in Dubai for 15 years, and it was 1 check. You had to walk around with the checkbook in your pocket. And what could you do as a landlord's representative or as a landlord in terms of tenant due diligence? Not a lot. That has changed a little bit now with the likes of the Etihad Credit Bureau. We use it as part of our vetting process for onboarding prospective tenants. You know, it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's part of the process to try for a landlord to try and make some form of educated decision. You know, all tenants need to provide a copy of a passport, copy of their MSID, your visa. Some landlords may ask for bank statements. You know, and this can become complicated when you're a new resident. I think with the new residents now, you know, issuing of visas is a lot quicker than it used to be. So that's not too much of a pain point than it has been. You can generally submit applications and start screening tenants on the proviso of letters of offer or submission of documentation to immigration and what have you to show that these things are in process. And invariably, it's not all that often that you find that applications are then rejected at that sort of point. I think that having the ability to start your search as soon as you can really helps, and that doesn't have to be on the basis of having documentation in place. Because, you know, we know the market is very fast moving at the moment, and that's in terms of inventory, price point, availability, brokers available to assist you with inspections and what have you, and to negotiate. So I think any conversations that you have are learning experiences for all parties in terms of setting expectations for both tenants and the brokers that you're working with in terms of how you're going to react and be able to engage with each other. And I think also from a management perspective, we know what our landlords are looking for. If you're dealing with a broker who is servicing 100 different landlords on non-managed inventory, so to speak, it's quite different, and those landlords may have different expectations.
Yeah, this is why I always say, like, working with a professional property management such as yourselves or an institutional landlord is always something that I usually recommend to people.
Absolutely.
And I do drop the Asteco name with at least with friends and family. Now, speaking of friends and family, this is it's a burning question on my mind, and it is a topic that I feel like everybody's talking about: the big, bad, ugly notice. Right?
Sure.
It seems like everybody I know who's renting a home now is being served that eviction notice from their landlord claiming that they want to sell the property. Is everyone really selling? What in the world is happening?
I can speak from our experience that obviously there are conversations that we have with any client that comes to us with this conversation and trying to understand really what the motivation is. There are very clear guidelines set by RERA in terms of the parameters that a landlord can use this notice for. And it's, is there going to be significant demolition or remodelling of a property for rehabilitation? If there is, then the existing tenant has the first right of refusal to actually lease the property back afterwards. So to turn around and say it's maintenance and giving it a lick of paint and a little bit of bathroom renovation isn't going to cut it. You need to have the right
But then how can
licenses.
a tenant verify it? What if the landlord says, I'm remodeling, but they're not really remodeling? Like, are tenants driving back around the property?
For the remodel,
for example,
the landlord actually needs to provide the certification from the municipality they are applying for the building permits.
Okay.
So it's not as simple as painting and
And in the
decorating.
event where they're claiming to be selling it, for
So
example.
if it's selling, now this is the really challenging one, and my personal view and the way we look at this is that RERA have the tools and mechanisms in place to help this, and I hope it comes into being, to help stem that issue. We've all got ajaris, okay? Now, an ajari is a registered certificate for protection of the tenant and landlord's rights that basically confirms the agreement between the parties on the property that you're leasing.
Correct.
As part of that notice being issued, the issuer, the landlord in this case, needs to provide a copy of that ajari. Therefore, in my opinion, the system is the systems are there. If you serve that notice, by law, you're not allowed to then resell it for another 2 years.
Or re-rent it for a higher
re-rent
price.
it for another, correct. And so basically the laws are there already. So the mechanisms, as everything's becoming more and more digitised, we believe that there should be a very easy mechanism of ticking the box, so to speak, digitally. A notice has been issued. Now, that in the future should block that unit from having a new ajari being issued. We're seeing it with service charges that aren't being paid on freehold units.
Yep.
If there's a service charge that hasn't
I'm
been
going to
paid
have a
for a long
question
time,
about service charges.
units then get blocked, so that you then can't issue an ajari. So why can't you do it the same when a landlord is issuing a supposed 12-month vacating notice? We find that the tenant, so in the event that the tenant feels that it's not quite right, they find it difficult to approach RERA and contest it because there's no evidence to say, I know that Mohammed's not going to go and live in that property. I know that he has his own home already. I know he doesn't live here, but he's doing it for this purpose. When the tenant has vacated, his only real recourse at this point in time is to basically knock on the door afterwards. And if you find there's someone else occupying the property, I'm a tenant. Well, okay, what do you do? I mean, the only recourse after that is then to go to municipality or RERA and say, listen, I was given the 12-month vacating notice based on this premise. We believe that's not necessarily the case now. I've met someone who's occupying the property as a tenant, and then you can file a case against the landlord who's evicted you.
Okay.
And you can actually take claims on your costs.
Oh, wow.
So if you've moved out of the property at 100,000, and the minimum that you can find of a similar type of property is 150, you can apply for compensation of that difference. Your costs, relocation, anything that's associated with it, you can actually be compensated for.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah. I haven't seen it written, But I mean, that's exactly what the law implies.
Okay.
And we are
And
aware.
usually, if I'm not wrong, you do so at the Rent Dispute Committee, right?
RDC, correct? Yeah, the Rent Dispute Centre.
So, but there isn't anything at RERA, right, that blocks the system from issuing another ijari if a notice has been served yet.
Not that we've found.
But I hear they're working on this.
The law says
Yeah.
exactly that.
So I'm going to dive a bit
happen.
deeper into the notice. What actually constitutes a proper notice?
The formal recognised approach is notice is issued from a notary public, and it's issued through their courier, delivered to site. And so you need to present a copy of the title deed, copy of the lease and ijari, contact details of the tenant to the notary through the notice issuing process. So anything that's sent to you by email, anything that's sent text message, WhatsApp, it's not acceptable.
This is a really big one, and to be honest, it even confuses me. A lot of people ask me this question. Sometimes I answer them, but I'm not 100% sure. But you're the expert. I'm a tenant. I receive a notice from my landlord saying that they want to sell their property, right? And the notice, first of all, is it 12 months from the date of the notice or 12 months from the expiry of my existing ijari? Which one is it?
You put me on the spot there, haven't you? Listen, it's a 12-month vacating notice, right? So
from the date of the notice.
Date of issue of the notice.
So the follow-on question here is, if my landlord is selling, right? The landlord issues the notice to me. The new buyer, right, or somebody buys that property from my landlord 9 months ago. So is it effective if I had received the notice from what is now a previous owner, or does the new owner have to issue the notice?
It's another one of those idiosyncratic things of Dubai that are evolving and how things are interpreted. The way it's legislated is that it's a 12-month notice from issuance.
Okay.
When it was first implemented, I think it was in 2009-ish, it was deemed to be 12 months from the date of commencement of lease. But in practical terms, that doesn't work, because how do I know if I need to sell my property partway through the tenancy period? So the way it's been applied now is from the date of notice. Now, you are the current landlord, Mohammed. You can issue me that notice at any time. The way the law is at the moment, if I'm partway through that tenancy contract and we transact the property and sell, the new owner inherits the existing tenancy contract as per the current terms and conditions of lease. So nothing changes. So in effect, that says that the notice that was issued by Mohammed stands for the duration of the 12 months. The first time I came across the statement that you've just posed to me, it was probably a month or two ago for the first time, that was talking about the seller has provided the 12 months notice partway through the lease, and then the buyer, upon taking ownership, had to issue a new 12 months notice. Now that makes no sense whatsoever, because you're saying, as an investor, I'm buying a property that has a tenant that already has a vacating notice, so I'm buying on the premise that in 6 months' time, I'm going to be able to move in, but now I can't. I have to wait for an additional 6 months after I've served the notice. That makes no sense whatsoever. So I can imagine, in the nicest possible way and greatest respect to all of my brokerage friends out there, this is some theory that a broker has come up with in terms of trying to convince people to get transactions done at a level that works for them. Because it doesn't make any sense in terms of a legal framework. It doesn't make any sense in terms of what the intention of the 12-month notice is. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever in terms of buying and selling of real estate and providing a vacating notice.
So what you're saying is, even if there is a new buyer for my property, so what I'm renting, the original notice should stand.
Correct. That's what we understand. That's the way we understand, and we work around that being the governing legislation. And the use of the notice. And so far, we haven't had any issues with that.
So two things people are talking about, and we were talking about this, the big bad notice, and the other one is rent increases. Now, we all know, prices are going crazy over the past few months, to say the least. And I think just this quarter versus last quarter, we're up nearly 20%. And this is always an area of contention, right, in one way or another. Because to be fair, as a landlord, you're looking at you're looking at Property Finder and you're saying, hey, I'm renting my property for 100,000 and I can see it up for rent at 150,000. But then there's the RERA index that says you can only increase within a certain percentage.
Correct.
Correct? Now, having said that, this is still quite often an area of contention where landlords and tenants aren't seeing eye to eye. What do you usually advise people? Because I'll tell you, for example, sometimes what I tell my friends who are tenants, I say, look, what I tell the tenants is I say, look, find an amicable middle ground. There is the RERA index, right? And I understand there's a RERA index, but you also want to build a long-term relationship with the landlord. And my friends who are landlords, I also usually tell them, hey, it's occupancy and a happy tenant over anything else. How do you usually, from a property wearing a property management hat, how are you usually navigating this this ongoing drama?
I have to look at it from multiple hats. Primarily, we're engaged by the landlord, so looking at it from their perspective. Unfortunately, we have landlords who say, I don't care, top dollar is all I'm looking to achieve. But fundamentally, an occupied property with a good tenant that you have a good relationship with, they're going to look after the property and actually give you better return over a longer period of time and have a good relationship with them. The challenge there is really trying to strike that balance. And I think that the key focus is, as you say, negotiate, have a conversation and come to some middle ground. Your index might say that you don't have an increase, but you're seeing around you that all of the properties are going crazy and you've had high vacancy in the units next door and you know that the asking rents are going up. So therefore, I know as a tenant that if I'm not up for an increase this year and the landlord asks me for something that's reasonable, should I consider it or should I be obstinate and say no? I mean, actually, if I say no, next year I'm going to get double or triple the hit, as the index continues to increase. So, I mean, in realistic terms, if you've got your common sense hat on, you kind of look at it, and we'd have that conversation with both parties, landlord and tenant, try and find some middle ground that works for both sides. Because if the tenant says, no, I'm not doing it, I'm going to vacate, he's cutting his nose off to spite his face in the market that we're currently
So you would,
going through
in a way, advocate for the middle ground approach as opposed to simply following RERA? Because a lot of people tell you, just follow the RERA index and there's nothing you can do.
Again, we're sometimes bound by the instruction that we have from our client, but we'd also try and apply some common sense to their decision making. Because, yes, it's a hot market and you can lease the unit again, but you still, no matter what, no matter how hot the market is, there's still going to be downtime.
Occupancy is always the most important factor.
Absolutely. You're going to have the tenants going to vacate. If it's acrimonious, then you're going to start having maybe more maintenance costs. Then you're going to have an argument about the security deposit. Then there's a possibility of you're going to have issues with engaging an agent to come and look at the unit, list it, get it up on the market.
So that's why landlords use Asteco, because they don't have to worry about all that.
That's my headache. Sorry, the team's headache, not mine.
So speaking of headaches, actually a good friend of mine ran this by me a few days ago. Their landlord changed the terms of the contract at renewal. My understanding all along was that the terms of the contract continue almost on automatic renewal every year. Right? So in this occasion, what happened was the landlord had originally agreed on 4 checks, where the minimum maintenance amount was 500 dirhams. At renewal, the landlord came and says, guess what? Now I want 1 check and the minimum acceptable maintenance charge is 1,000 dirhams. That was the real story. Can a landlord do that? Because I didn't think so.
No, I mean, the law says any changes that are proposed from either party need to be at least 90 days in advance of the expiry. Okay, so this is where you have the rental increase. So when your rent's up for renewal, you need to have a minimum of 90 days notice proposing what that change is going to be. Now you can propose, either party can propose any changes, but they have to be mutually agreeable. So the rent is the only one that doesn't have to be mutually agreeable.
Because there's
an index that governs that. But what the law says is, I will give you notice that I'm intending to increase the rent as per the index. Or any other. Let's say we have a conversation and we agree 5% and the 5% isn't in the index, but we both agree. So in terms of the rental payments, the number of instalments or maintenance provisions or anything else, it's governed by the same. You can ask, but you cannot enforce.
Oh, got it. Okay, this is, yeah, that, because that's actually what I told him. I said, my understanding is outside of the RERA index, all terms have to stay the same unless mutually agreed.
Mutually agreeable.
So the tenant can essentially tell the landlord, hey, no, we have a contract that says 4 checks, that continues.
Correct.
Another piece of drama, I have so many of them, right? Landlords, and it happened to a close friend. The landlord wasn't paying service charges, right? And the building started to cut off certain services, access cards, whatever that might be. What can a tenant do in that case?
I think RERA are really working to try, with Moloch and what have you, is the integration of service charges from owners, association management companies are kind of being centralised to try and really work on, because I suppose it's a balancing act. You have lots of investors that are international that don't necessarily have representation here, that own property, but they have the commitments as well. Historically, we've seen it when the market's not been so good and the rent is a little bit of money, doesn't necessarily cover service charges and mortgage instalments and what have you, so something's got to give. We're not in that situation at the moment. The money's there because the rents are so high and what have you. There really needs to be something else legislatively that enforces landowners to pay. For a tenant, I think that if they're in that situation, the biggest crux is if they can demonstrate they've been trying to communicate with the landlord and the landlord's failing to pay. If they've got the information from the owners committee, which is showing there's a breach notice for non-payment and this is why we're disconnecting your access, I think there's a fair conversation for the tenant to then go to RERA, the RDC, and have a conversation around that. Because at the end of the day, if I don't pay my rent, the landlord's going to hit me straight away and start filing a vacating notice or eviction for non-payment. But at the
By the
same
way,
time,
in that case, that was the one time I didn't call you and I told the tenant to go to RDC. So the guys at RDC must not really like me because they keep sending me people. They ask me a question like, go to RDC.
Well, they are actually really helpful. The good thing is they are very helpful, and they won't necessarily put anything in writing to tell you, but they do give pretty good advice. And at least if they can't give you an answer, they're able to direct you to departments.
I think what RDC told that guy to do at the time was to go, so they worked it out with Dubai Holdings where the tenant went and deposited the second installment of rent payment with Dubai Holdings, and it was just a big drop.
Sure. And so that would have basically been my suggestion, is talk to RDC and come to agreement with them that you're not going to be in trouble with the landlord or have any possibility of a rent dispute filed against you for non-payment if you then offset the cost. If you pay those service charges to maintain access to the property.
So speaking of rent installments, if you're not sick of me yet, I just have one more question and it really is a question because it's been on my mind lately, and I'd like to think I have the answer for it, but I'm not always so sure. 1 checks are back in fashion, right? Or at least everyone is asking for them. Now, if I might ask you, you manage 20,000 plus properties. Is this really the case? I mean, I know people are asking for 1 check, but in reality, just about what percentage of the lease agreements that you currently have, if you don't mind sharing, are indeed 1 check?
Probably 5% if you're lucky.
Wow.
Honestly.
Okay.
We have for a very long time been working with landlords and looking at multiple instalments. As prices go up, a single check becomes less affordable and less attractive. If you've got a building of 250 units that you're trying to lease and you're trying to push the rental values up, then you want to fill it up as quickly as you possibly can. So you're looking at the number of instalments to actually make it attractive. If you start saying 1 payment, again, we know the typical Dubai story of, especially with newcomers, right? When life is a lot more expensive than you may necessarily think about, and you go, well, school fees and this and that. When you come 12 months in and you go, oh crikey, I didn't save enough money, or the dog died, or something's happened and I need to pay out something that was unexpected, then how are you going to make that 1 check?
Win the lottery? I don't know.
Win the lottery, it's helpful.
Well, there's no lottery here, but but speaking of checks, this is another announcement that has been also fairly confusing to a lot of people. The announcement from that we'd read, it was all over the news, that now DLD has the framework that allows monthly payments online. Right? People ask me this question all the time. The way I understand it is there's a framework in place, but that doesn't mean that all rents are happening in one. We wish that monthly rent payments will be a thing again, And I know that there's a lot of efforts going into making that happen.
Yeah.
But if I understand this correctly, it's just a framework that exists. It doesn't mean that people are paying rent monthly online.
So I mean,
mainstream.
it's a great subject, and it's one that's really close to Asteco. In 2018, 2019, we were the first real estate company to work with direct debit. Now we worked with an entity that set up direct debits in the UAE. We're the only ones outside of financial institutions and car companies and what have you that had the ability to do that. So it's something that is really close to us. Now we've worked even closer with the entity, and that has changed specifically to be direct bank to bank, and that's mandated from central bank. We were shocked when we came across the publication of the Lands Department report about this new monthly payment coming. I know of a number of brokerages that have touted this and talked about it, and have talked about Ajari's connection to monthly payments and Ajari's connection to direct debit and what have you. It's not direct debit. It is some form of monthly payment, an instalment possibility, but it's very similar in what the old style of direct debit that we used to have was, which was I take the money from, set up a direct debit mandate or a payment mandate. Mohammed's paying to me as an intermediary. So within the new framework, this is under Ajari and Nakudi, is you're paying the tenant pays the rent to the Nakudi account with the Ajari details.
Okay.
And then the landlord's bank picks that up and collects it. So what direct debit is, and what we've worked very closely with the central bank on, and direct debit direct debit AE, is literally what direct debit is in the rest of the world. It is bank to bank with no third party intermediary. Now for us, as a property management company, we've had some challenges because we work with obviously various landlords and they have different requirements. Now if you have a landlord that has a rental banking mandate from their financiers, no third party can touch that money. It must go direct from tenant to landlord.
Correct.
So we've struggled with working with some of our larger landlords that have finances in place or what have you, to be able to implement a direct debit payment to assist their tenants and also assist themselves in terms of auto reconciliations and what have you of the rental collections because of the third party acting.
So if I could ask you the question differently, in the same way that only 5% of contracts are in one payment, what percentage of contracts you think in the market, not just at Asteco, are monthly payments?
Monthly?
Yeah.
Probably similar. Probably only sort of 5 or 10% in the market as a whole. You know, in my personal opinion, it's very agency driven in terms of, listen, Mohammed, I can get you the best possible rent. I can get you this one check.
Would you advise landlords to accept monthly payments?
We do. I think that ultimately, from a business ourselves, is we see that the monthly is more beneficial to the tenant. It eases the cost burden.
Absolutely.
It gives the landlord more certainty in terms of we view in terms of the rent collection. Because if you're telling me, okay, I'm going to give you 2 checks, you know, I've still got to save for 6 months to pay that rent.
Correct.
Now, if I have that problem,
But then usually it comes at a bit of a premium, right?
can do, sure.
But do you see tenants adopting to paying that premium in exchange for paying monthly?
I think, yeah, we do. You know, I would say the majority of our rentals are quarterly, and we probably have about 20% which are monthly. And we see that growing because, again, we're looking at the monthly payment situation and the direct debit situation. But tenants will pay a premium. I mean, the premiums aren't huge when you're talking about the difference between 1 installment and 12 or 4.
12, 15%.
Yeah, at the most. And you know, for my own peace of mind of ensuring that I've written those checks and that they're going to clear without there being an issue and me being able to manage my funds, it's cash flow. And you know, from a landlord's perspective as well, 1 unit or multiple units, if you're talking to your accountant, you're talking about what's your cash flow and what are your operating costs and what have you, it's a heck of a lot easier to do those sums if you've got a steady monthly income and steady monthly outgoings rather than these big blips of you know, I've got $1 million dirhams coming in this month, but I've got nothing for the next 3. But I've still got these costs that I have to manage with that income. So, you know, I think it actually is a story that works really well for both sides. But there's just a lot of agents in town that are really pushing the one check story, and it's something that we had hoped was kind of starting to dwindle away. But now, because of the way the economy's moving and things are heating up, there's just this drive that, great, people are coming, they must have the cash, let's just push them as hard as we can, and I'll do you a deal and we'll take one check. It's quite short-sighted.
Yeah, absolutely. Morgan, I don't know how to begin to thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Home Finders podcast.
Pleasure.
Those conversations are always enriching. I always walk away 20-30% smarter and more informed about what's happening in the
You're
rental
too kind.
market. Thank you so much, Morgan, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.